Okay. Tisle Ankitla. Hello, Mr. Fritzla. Ajapempala Tisle, Wangila Tisle, Tenzin Tisle, Kamala Tisle, and I think we shall proceed with the session. So it's already 6:01. So, and thank you, Ankitla, for accepting our request to be able to speak on today's topic. And the purpose of this program was that Tibet House has started this virtual teaching series titled Introduction to Buddhism, which consists of 24 different topics. And we have invited and we are inviting several speakers with the advanced knowledge of Nalanda Buddhist Studies, and these programs actually aims at people who really wants to deepen their understanding on the diverse Buddhist disciplines in order to lay the basic foundation of Nalanda Buddhist Studies. So therefore, this time, and before this session, we have invited Mr. Ankil Gol. Probably most of you are known him. And but I would like to introduce him briefly. And Mr. Ankit Gol is a student of Buddhism and has attended various teaching given at Tibet House, New Delhi, and including the he recently completed his first batch of Nalanda Master's course. And he has the background of IT, and he's currently works in the area of finance, utilizing these skills. So he will be touching today's topic on the Guide to the Bodhisattva Way of Life, chapter number 6, Forbearance. And thank you, Ankitla, for accepting our request. And I would not take much time and kindly proceed with the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Tenzin for the brief introduction. And I would like to welcome everybody to the 12th session of this introductory series, very kindly organized by Tibet House, New Delhi, under the auspices of Venerable Geshe-la Dorji Dandulji. And I would like to give my heartfelt thanks to Geshe-la and Tibet House and all the staff for organizing this and also giving me opportunity to participate in this and share some knowledge that I have gained over past few years. So I think without further delay, I would like to discuss today's topic, which is, I think, we all know that we should imbibe this quality of patience within us, all of us, because given today's circumstances, not just today's, but in general, things that irritate us, obstacles that arise in our day-to-day lives, and not only that, in our spiritual practice as well, more often than not, we face the difficulties. And so patience is something that is definitely which we need almost all the time as ordinary beings. Of course, I'm not talking about the people who already are practicing in our advanced stage. So Bodhisattva Shantideva, this is the third perfection in the 6 perfections of the Bodhisattva practices, as you would already know by now. And the one of the whole chapter 6 of Bodhisattva Charyavatara, that is a guide to the Bodhisattva's way of life, is dedicated to this topic on the patience. And it's a beautifully composed, beautifully written verses in this chapter, which discuss the need to practice patience, how to practice patience, and from various aspects. And I'm sure as all of you would be aware by now that the beautiful style of Bodhisattva Shantideva has been not like just to instruct us that you should do this and you should do that, but it's rather while telling us how we should practice, how we should enact on the spiritual path, especially as Mahayana practitioners, giving reasoning through citing sutras, scriptures, as well as through logical arguments. So in that way, it really grounds our gives a ground to our practice. and gives us an impetus, I should say, and not just kind of an instruction to follow, but with reason and a different kind of force and understanding. So before I actually start discussing the going through the verses of this chapter, chapter 6, there is a brief prelude. And these verses I recently came across while reading through some text related to patience. These verses are from Precious Garland, or I think it's Ratnavali in Sanskrit, by Arya Nagarjuna, which briefly gives a summary overview of these 6 perfections of the Bodhisattva's practice. So just to recap the 6 perfections, what they are, and what is the need to practice them. So here to present in brief the qualities of the Bodhisattva, they are generosity, morality, forbearance, diligence, meditative absorption, wisdom, compassion, and so on. So it's basically outlining the 6 perfections, and also together combining them with the very important underlying element of compassion, which is the kind of a thread which ties all of these together. Then generosity is the utter giving up of self-interest. Morality refers to working for others' welfare. Forbearance or patience is to relinquish hostility. Increasing positive deeds is diligence. So increasing positive deeds is diligence. It's basically diligence or joyous, it is also often translated as joyous effort. And increasing positive deeds is like finding joy in virtue. In the virtuous activities, we heartily engage. So that is the connotation here. Then meditative absorption is one-pointedness with no afflictions. Wisdom is to establish the meaning of truth. Compassion is an intelligence that cares for all beings equally, as if they are all same. Now, the next verse basically tells us what are the benefits, in very brief, what are the benefits of practicing these 6 perfections. So, generosity brings resources, morality, happiness, forbearance, luster, diligence, majesty, meditative absorption brings tranquility, and wisdom release. And all aims are realized with a compassionate heart. Through simultaneous perfection of all 7 of these without exception, one attains lordship of world itself, the sphere of inconceivable gnosis. So just before again I start with the chapter, so to cover the 6 perfections in brief. So following as a Mahayana practitioner, our aim is the main goal, as we already know, is the Bodhicitta motivation, which is that the aim to become a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings, to lead them to the same state of Buddhahood as ourselves. And as we know that as gradually we study and explore that what practices are involved, what kind of mind trainings are involved, we realize that this is an endeavor that can last over lifetimes, easily last over lifetimes. And so keeping that in perspective, what we need as we take, as a practitioner, what we would want is we take in our future lives. As a Dharma practitioner, we would want that we should not be lacking in resources in our next lives. So practicing generosity would ensure that because of our generosity in the future lives, we will have ample resources and we don't have to worry, we don't have to engage much time in gathering the resources, but we'll have them due to our generosity of past lives. Now, having resources alone is not enough. A person may be born, a being may be born with resources, but may not be as a human being. It may be, we can see some even having some animal rebirth, but in very luxurious surroundings. So to have a good human rebirth in order to practice Dharma, that's where the second perfection plays a role, the morality or ethical discipline. And then that is not all. Being born in a favorable human condition with ample resources, we would like to get teachings, get the guidance of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, be able to get in touch with like-minded beings, practitioners. For that, we need to have, that's where the practice of patience plays an important role. With patience of forbearance, we'll get a gentle appearance, peaceful appearance, so that the beings are naturally attracted to us, the teachers and other dharma friends. So we'll have a kind of easy access to teachings and teachers. That's where patience plays an important role. And of course, the diligence or joyous effort is underlying, it is required for all of these practices. And then the last two perfections, perfection of concentration and the perfection of wisdom. Of course, we need those for single pointedness and to realize the reality. As we know, the wisdom is the main antidote for us to get rid of ignorance and be freed from samsara and attain enlightenment. So that's just, I wanted to give a recap of the six perfections and from a different perspective. So now today's topic will be focusing on the third perfection, or what has been earlier also written as Forbearance, chapter 6 from Bodhisattva Shantideva's Bodhicaryavatara. So I've used certain outlines like I did last time. So these outlines, so as I mentioned the heading, the need to cultivate patience, that in the first 10 verses, Bodhisattva Shantideva discusses that why is it so important for us as a spiritual practitioner, in particular as a Mahayana practitioner, if somebody following the Bodhisattva path, why patience is so critical. So reading verse 1. Whatever wholesome deeds, such as venerating the Buddhas and generosity, that have been amassed over 1,000 eons, will all be destroyed in one moment of anger. So in just this one verse, Bodhisattva Shantideva has summarized kind of immense danger the anger presents. And as the line 4 says, will all be destroyed in one moment of anger. So just one moment of anger can destroy an immense amount of our effort, virtuous effort that we would have made in not just in this life, but over past many lifetimes. So as the line 3 says, over 1,000 eons. What is an eon? So I'm sure many of you already have a rough idea, and also roughly speaking, an eon is, as in the Buddhist cosmology and I think in ancient Indian cosmology, they say that the universe goes through the 4 cycles of coming into being and then staying, then destruction of the universe, and then there is a void. So these 4 are kind of like 4 divisions, and these 4 comprise of one eon. And then 1,000 such eons, the merit accumulated over such a great length, it can possibly be destroyed by just one moment of anger. Now, of course, we might feel that if this is the case, we almost keep getting angry every now and then, and almost we may not even remember even during a single day how many times we might have become angry like this. So there are various detailed discussions on in what situations there is actually such immense kind of destruction of our merits. For instance, it will depend on the person who is getting angry, whether that person is an ordinary being or say a high level practitioner or bodhisattva. And likewise, with whom the person is getting angry with, the object of our anger, whether that person is an ordinary being or a realized practitioner or bodhisattva, for example. And further, what the sutras and shastras are basically commentaries. They also go into detail in discussing what kind of virtues are destroyed, whether they are the virtues related to our physical virtuous activities, for example, acts of generosity or ethical discipline, or related to our mental virtuous activities such as patience, concentration, or wisdom. So all these details are there. So of course that requires a much more detailed study. So just to, in brief, what it is saying is that it is definitely the case that a moment of anger definitely destroys a lot of merit, whether we are ordinary being or a bodhisattva. There is no doubt about that. So that's why it becomes immensely important for us to gradually start practicing patience, habituating ourselves with it. And then further going on to the second verse, there is no evil like hatred and no fortitude like patience. Thus, I should strive in various ways to meditate on patience. So that is why Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying that there is nothing worse for us to than to give in to our anger, our hatred. And it is, Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying, it is evil because not only destroys our virtues, also the negative actions, non-virtuous actions that it leads us to create. It sends us, it not only harms our this life, we lose our mental peace immediately, that is obvious. But furthermore, the negative actions that we create due to our anger, the future sufferings that are going to come in future lives, the lower realms and other things, the sufferings that we are going to bear just because of our own anger and hatred, it's immense. It's immense. And because of that, there is no fortitude like patience, because the only antidote, the only antidote, the only way we can get gradually gain control over our angers, over the non-virtuous actions that anger gives rise to, is by cultivating patience. Therefore, I should strive in various ways to meditate on patience. So, more than this life, to protect ourselves from going to lower realms and destroying whatever virtues, hampering our dharma activities, we should definitely seriously practice patience. So, verse 3, my mind will not experience peace if it fosters painful thoughts of hatred. I shall find no joy or happiness. Unable to sleep, I shall feel unsettled. So, this is straightforward. And as the line one says, my mind will not experience peace. Obviously, as we are angry, we at ordinary level, we know that our minds get disturbed. There is no peace. Also, it has a connotation that we will not be able to develop meditative concentration with if we have such minds which get easily irritated or angry. Master who has hatred is in danger of being killed even by those who for their wealth and happiness depend upon his kindness. So again, these are listing the various drawbacks of not cultivating patience, and as a corollary, uh, giving into our anger and hateful attitudes. By it, friends and relatives are disheartened. Though drawn by my generosity, they will not trust me. In brief, there is nobody who lives happily with anger. So, though these are self-explanatory, but just to briefly go through them. So, even the people who may be working for us, who may be working with us, and even our relatives and close ones who may actually have affection towards us, and people who may be drawn towards us because of our generosity, even our ethical discipline. But if we have an angry attitude towards them, even they will not like to be with us. And no matter what other things we may provide for them, they won't like, first of all, they will feel unhappy, and they they won't be trusting us. That is also a major thing. Even because of lack of anger, people will not trust us. So, hence, verse 6 says, hence the enemy anger creates sufferings such as these, but whoever assiduously overcomes it finds happiness now and thereafter. So, going to verse 7. So, in verse 7, Bodhisattva Shantideva says, having found its fuel of mental unhappiness in the prevention of what I wish for, and in doing of what I do not want, hatred increases and then destroys me. So now in verse 7, Bodhisattva Shantideva is summarizing or very briefly discussing that the mechanism of how and why generally, typically anger arises in us. So as we know that there are two things we want. One thing is things, the objects of our desire, the things we need, we cherish. So we want such things. Other things is things that we want to avoid, suffering situations or whatever people, activities that we don't want to engage in. So we want to get away from these. So two things generally, some things we wish and some things we do not wish. And when these two wishes do not come true, for instance, we want something, we want something, and if that thing we cannot gain access to, or if something hinders it, immediately we feel we are unhappy, we are uncomfortable. And likewise, if something we do not want to do, we do not want to engage in activity or meet a person, but somehow we are made to do that, again we become unhappy. Now this mental, Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying that this fuel of enlightenment, this fuel of mental unhappiness, this is what results in the anger. It gives rise to hatred, which ultimately gives rise to anger, and which results in us engaging in harmful physical or verbal actions. So in verse 8, Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying, therefore I should totally eradicate this, the fuel of this enemy, the fuel of this enemy, fuel referring to the mental unhappiness. That I should, Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying that I should be vigilant and continuously check my mind, that as soon as a situation arises where my mind is becoming unhappy or already has become unhappy, I should try to stop it then and there, try to prevent this fuel of unhappiness giving rise to anger, the next step. So line 3 reads of verse 8, for this enemy has no other function than that of causing me harm. Because if I let go of this mental unhappiness unchecked, it will give rise to further unease, hatred, and anger in me, and leading to engaging in non-virtuous actions. And how can one control this? In verse 9, Bodhisattva Shantideva says, whatever befalls me, I shall not disturb my mental joy. For having been made unhappy, I shall not accomplish what I wish, and my virtues will decline. So Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying that situations, of course, will arise where unfavorable for us, but no matter what those are external situations, I shall not disturb my mental joy. Because for having been made unhappy, if I let that happen, I shall not accomplish what I wish. So in this context, uh, this can we can I think read this in at two levels. I shall not accomplish in the ordinary sense also in our day-to-day lives. If we easily let ourselves get angry, and then what even our day-to-day activities or goals that we wish to accomplish, even they may be hindered. Furthermore, most importantly here, our main goal as a bodhisattva practitioner in the context of Bodhicaryavatara is to be engaging in bodhisattva activities, not only for ourselves, but for the sake of others. And on the other hand, if we give into anger, all we will give up easily, it will hinder our bodhisattva activities, our virtues and merits. They will be easily destroyed. And further, due to the non-virtues actions we'll be creating, whereas our goal is to help others, we'll be harming others. Whereas our goal is to attain Buddha, we'll be hindering our progress in practice. And so that's why in verse 10, verse 10 Bodhisattva Shantideva says, why be unhappy about something if it can be remedied? And what is the use of being unhappy about something if it cannot be remedied? So this is a very famous verse, and I'm sure many of you might know this already. So again, this is Bodhisattva Shantideva in very brief summary way telling us that even if unfavorable circumstances arise, and so if you can do something about the situation, then there is no need for you to be unhappy. And if it is the case that you think that you cannot do much about it, it's a difficult thing, then even then, there's no point in getting unhappy about it. So these first 10 verses, as I said, they basically, in these 10 verses, Bodhisattva Shantideva is putting a lot of emphasis on the need to cultivating patience, showing the harmful effects and that as a Bodhisattva practitioner, it will bring to us, Mahayana practitioner. Now, the next part of the majority of this chapter, next 100 or so verses, actually Bodhisattva Shantideva discusses how to cultivate the patience. So this outline, these outlines that you see in the colored box, I've taken from a commentary called Nectar of Manjushri's speech on Bodhicaryavatara. So these outlines are available online if you can search. So I've just used them here to so that the structure of this chapter can become a more easy for us to understand. So as I said, after the first 10 verses, next 100 verses, they mainly talk about how can we cultivate the patience. So these headlines will be coming down further, so I'll not go through them here. So verse 11 says, "For myself and for my friends, I want no suffering, no disrespect, no harsh words, and nothing unpleasant. But for enemies, it is the opposite." So as I discussed in the beginning, that there are things we want pleasant things or desirable things to happen for us, whereas to us and to our loved ones, whereas to our enemies, we don't want them to have good things, and on the contrary, we want to have them the suffering or problems befalling on them. So this is how, as our general mental attitude is. So here, Bodhisattva Shantideva has outlined four things that for myself and my loved ones, I don't want any kind of suffering, disrespect, harsh words, and nothing unpleasant of any sort. And for my enemies, I want the opposite of these things. I want them to suffer, have disrespect, and harsh words, and so on. So, and furthermore, we can look at their opposite also. For myself and my friends, we would want to have all kinds of comfort or desirable objects, that everybody should respect us, everybody should speak with us pleasantly, and so on. So in this way, the further verses will be focusing on the various these kind of divisions on how to cultivate patience in when these various kinds of situations arise. So that is why I'm spending some time on kind of this enumeration here. So next, going to the verse 12. So in terms of cultivating patience, first of all, Bodhisattva Shantideva discusses that the most obvious situation is when suffering arises for us, when we get any discomfort into any kind of adverse condition. How should we cultivate patience in such situations? The next 10 verses discusses those. So in verse 12, Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying, "The causes of happiness sometimes occur, but the causes for suffering are very many. Without suffering, there is no renunciation. Therefore, mind, you should stand firm." So one thing Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying that as because of habitually we under the influence of ignorance and negative emotions, we are more prone to engage in non-virtuous actions rather than the virtuous actions. in our past lives as well as this life. And therefore, the causes of happiness occur very rarely sometimes. Whereas because of our immense non-virtuous actions, it is more easy for us to encounter difficult situations. The causes of suffering are very many. But in the next two lines, Bodhisattva Shantideva is kind of elucidating the benefits that we wish we can think from the suffering that befalls on us from a different perspective. Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying that without suffering, we will not generate a sense of renunciation, a sense of disenchantment from the samsara. If things are going on easy and very smooth for us, it's rarely that we'll try to see the false, the negative aspects of samsara. So when suffering befalls on us, it is easy for us to see the faults of samsara and develop renunciation. And thinking thus, Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying that therefore, in the face of suffering, the mind you should stand firm. And then in verse 13, Bodhisattva is saying, if some ascetics and the people of Karnapa endure the pain of cuts and burns for no reason, then for the sake of liberation, why have I no courage? So in the first lines, Bodhisattva Shantideva is probably referring to some of the contemporary ascetic practices, some groups maybe. Maybe some similar practices exist today also. I'm not very sure, where for the sake of the liberation, people might cut their bodies or do some kind of harm and other such things, and which obviously won't lead to liberation, because unless one removes the ignorance, there is no by the practice, by cultivating wisdom, these such practices, they, rather than harming oneself and probably creating non-virtuous karmas, it won't lead to liberation. So Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying some ascetics thinking, or some beings, such beings who engage in such practices, thinking that they will lead to liberation, they voluntarily harm themselves, create suffering upon themselves. Then for the sake of liberation, why have I no courage? Then we as Mahayana practitioners who are seeking enlightenment for ourselves and for all the sentient beings, when suffering befalls on us, rather than facing it and cultivating patience, if we give in to hatred, if we give in to anger, then then we are worse than the people, the above ascetics, who are bringing suffering upon themselves for the sake of liberation. And as liberation seekers, when suffering befalls on us, therefore we should try to cultivate patience, because not only it will we'll gain merit because of cultivating patience, we'll also be purifying our past negative karmas. So going on to verse 14. There is nothing whatsoever that is not made easier through acquaintance. So through becoming acquainted with small harms, I should learn to patiently accept greater harms. Then Bodhisattva Shantideva is talking about that as a beginner bodhisattva, somebody who's beginning on the started following the path at the beginner level. Obviously, somebody new to this kind of idea, one should start patiently. So how can one go to practicing, developing such a practice? So this is what Bodhisattva Shantideva was discussing in next few verses. So in continuation of verse 14, verse 15 is saying, who has not seen this to be so with trifling sufferings, such as the bites of snakes and insects, feelings of hunger and thirst, and with such minor things as rashes. So he's saying that even such things, when say mosquito bites we go through, or during the summer heat here in Delhi, or the cold winters, we have to bear those things. We have no choice, no matter what. So such sufferings which we have to bear, and so therefore we have certain degree of patience already to go through them. And as while going through them, if we are mindful, and rather than getting irritated or upset about such situations, we should try to gradually develop a mental attitude of forbearance or patience against such small kind of difficulties that arise for us. And by practicing in this way, once our minds become habitual or acquainted of not getting easily irritated or upset when such external situations arise, then gradually we will be able to even remain calm and patient in the face of when something even more uh, difficult arises in our lives. So, verse 16 says, I should not be impatient with heat and cold, wind and rain, sickness, bondage, and beatings. For if I am the harm they cause me will increase. So, this is in continuation of verse 15. So, as I said, we should try to bear with patience the situations that we can easily deal with. For example, the situations of heat in summers or cold in winters, and likewise wind, rain, and sickness. Any obviously as we felt sick, bondage and beatings. So I'm not sure how to interpret bondage and beatings in this context, but maybe as a bodhisattva practitioner, when such situations arise, uh, Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying to even remain in calm state and patient state in such situations. For if I am impatient even in these situations, the harm they cause me will increase. So even in these situations, if I become irritated or angry or upset, then the harm they cause me will increase in the sense that already whatever physical suffering one might be going through under these circumstances, they are already there. But on top of that, if one becomes unhappy or irritated or agitated, one will suffer mentally as well, number one. And furthermore, if getting angry one engages in some non-virtuous actions, then not only there is harm due to these situations, due to the negative actions one might create by becoming impatient, one will be creating further causes of facing the sufferings in the future lives, even in this life. So Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying, remain patient. And by remaining patient in these situations, which are relatively easier to deal with, then gradually one will be able to cultivate patience. And he's giving an example, an illustration in the verse 17 of this. Some, when they see their own blood, become specially brave and steady, but some, when they see the blood of others, faint and fall unconscious. So, for example, in earlier times, there were the soldiers and warriors who would be fighting on the field. Even today's, of course, there are soldiers and other beings engaged in warfare. So, by gradually training and through maybe participation in a number of such activities, rather than when they see the blood on their own bodies in the midst of war, instead of becoming afraid or coward, being feeling coward, they become more brave. And how does it happen? It is because of their past habituation that they are not afraid, and rather they become even more brave. Whereas someone who has not faced such situations and is easily afraid of seeing blood, then not just their own blood, if they see somebody else bleeding, they might become very faint-hearted. So this is the example Bodhisattva Shanti, an illustration Bodhisattva Shantideva is giving, that these reactions come from the mind, being either steady or timid. Therefore, I should disregard harms caused to me and not be affected by suffering. So all these reactions of given a certain circumstance, how does one react? Ultimately, it is determined by one's own thought processes, how one has cultivated one's mind in the face of such situations, in the face of sufferings and difficult circumstances. So, if one is gradually trained, uh, being having forbearance and patience with smaller situations, And gradually one can become patient and brave in the midst of when more difficult circumstances arise. Then verse 19 says, even when the wise are suffering, their minds remain very lucid and undefiled because of their training, past trainings that they would have gone through. For they know, these wise beings know that when the war is being waged against the disturbing conceptions, much harm is caused at the times of the battle. So, as spiritual as a bodhisattva practitioners, Mahayana practitioners, and in general, uh, for us following this spiritual path, we know that the main causes of our suffering are our disturbing conceptions, because our afflictions, because it is our afflictions which give rise, which entangle us and lead us to engage in the negative actions, and which ultimately cause further suffering for us. So our main goal here is, or the main thing is, as Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying, that it is like waging a war against these afflictions. As spiritual practitioners, our gross afflictions, which we can easily see, anger, desire, jealousy, pride, and so forth, and finally rooting out the ignorance. So we are kind of waging a war against all these disturbing conceptions, because they are the main cause of our suffering, and they are what are hindering us from attaining our happiness. And as we are waging war against these disturbing conceptions, much harm is caused at the times of battle. So initially we will be facing difficulties because of our habitual tendencies of naturally giving into negative emotions. Then verse 20 says, the victorious warriors are those who, having disregarded all suffering, vanquish the foes of hatred and so forth. Common warriors slay only corpses. So this is straightforward. Then verse 21. Furthermore, suffering has good qualities. Through being disheartened with it, arrogance is dispelled. Compassion arises for those in cyclic existence. Evil is shunned and joy is found in virtue. Here, Bodhisattva Shantideva is summarizing in very brief the good qualities that suffering has. Through being disheartened with it, as Bodhisattva Shantideva mentioned earlier in the text, that through suffering is what brings renunciation in our mind, brings kind of disenchantment from the samsara through seeing our own suffering as well as our loved ones and gradually of everybody around us. And also arrogance is dispelled and compassion arises for those in cyclic existence. It is only when we see beings around us also in the suffering state that we can give rise to compassion. If there is no suffering around us, then there is no basis for us to cultivate compassion. And then evil is shunned. When we see suffering around us, we know that we gradually learn and come to know that this suffering is created by our own past negative actions, past over non-virtuous actions, evil actions, so as not to create further causes of suffering. One would try not to engage in the non-virtuous actions. One would try to refrain from negativities, and therefore evil is shunned, and joy is found in virtue. And furthermore, one to create the causes of happiness, one would voluntarily know and engage in the virtuous action. So one will, as one practices and trains, one will find joy in engaging in virtuous activities. So these are the few of the very positive qualities of suffering that Bodhisattva Shantideva is summarizing in verse 21. So, sorry. So as I said, we are now this part of the text that we are going through is talking about cultivating patience in different circumstances. And the past the few 9 or 10 verses, they Bodhisattva Shantideva discussed cultivation of patience in accepting the suffering circumstances. Now, in the next few verses, Bodhisattva Shantideva is also bringing in the need for us, or see why, or telling us why we should cultivate patience from the perspective of that how things exist in reality, how everything is dependently originated, including our suffering, and also the happiness that we can give rise to. From this perspective, now Bodhisattva Shantideva is discussing this part. Excuse me. So in verse 22, Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying, as I do not become angry with great sources of suffering, such as jaundice, then why be angry with animate creatures? They too are provoked by conditions. So we all know that if we fall sick, cough, cold, or even some illness such as jaundice, etc. And recently, we all know that the COVID pandemic has been such a serious problem all around the world. So we do not become angry with sources of these sufferings. We say that they are inanimate. We generally don't even think about getting angry under such circumstances with the causes of these such things. But we easily become angry with the people, or with other people if they do anything that we don't like, anything harmful to us. Now, Bodhisattva Shantideva is making us think that we are distinguishing somehow between these two things, animate and inanimate. Bodhisattva Shantideva is telling us that both these things are provoked by conditions. When we get sick, it is not some random happening. It is by coming together of various causes and conditions that we can fall sick. Likewise, Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying, even if somebody is harming us, it is they too are provoked by various causes and conditions, uh, by the situation that might have arisen and their own past habituation uh, of anger and afflictions. And it is not that they are entirely under control. It is very similar to how we fall sick by coming together of various conditions. And this is further discussed in the coming verses. Verse 23 says, although they are not wished for, these sicknesses arise. So we don't wish to fall sick at any point of time, but still they arise when the various causes are gathered for us to fall sick. And line 3 of verse 23 says, and likewise, although they are not wished for, these disturbing conceptions forcibly arise. So here Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying that in the same manner as when various conditions gather, we fall sick. There's no way to prevent that from happening. In the likewise, the person or enemies who harm us, even though they don't wish for the anger or disturbing conceptions to arise in them, when causes and conditions are there, these afflictions arise in them and give rise to anger. And this is what is further elaborated in verse 24. Without thinking, I shall be angry, people become angry with no resistance. And without thinking, I shall produce myself, likewise, anger itself is produced. So, this is what we are discussing, that we do not premeditate and think that, okay, I will become angry now. It is just something triggers the anger inside us. And from our own experience in day-to-day lives, we can easily see that uh, the anger just arises within us in just an instant. And what causes it to arise? Of course, there are certain conditions, situations that are present. And when these situations are present, typically because of our past habituation, we'll instantly become angry. So, as Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying, that without thinking, I shall be angry. When these situations are there, we become angry without any premeditation, or resistance. And likewise, the anger just automatically arises. It does not think that I should produce myself. So now going on to verse 25. All mistakes that are and all the various kinds of evil arise through the force of conditions. They do not govern themselves. Verse 26. These conditions that assemble together have no intention to produce anything, and neither does their product have the intention to be produced. So again, taking the example of any emotion, any kind of emotion that arises in us. Here, Bodhisattva Shantideva is talking specifically in the context of anger. But we can think of any emotion in our lives. We become happy, uh, or sad, or angry. So if we think about it, reflect on it a little bit, we'll realize that suddenly we realize that something happens around us, or we think of something, it can instantly give rise to some emotion within us. And so this is the coming together of these conditions that have given rise to this emotion. And in and of themselves, these conditions that are there, some thought or something external that is there, these situations are they don't have any intention to give rise to such an emotion within us. So number one, and furthermore, the emotion that which may arise in us, be it anger, sadness, happiness, desire, that emotion also does not have any intention, or it did not think before that I shall arise now, and after that it became manifest in us. Nothing like that. It is just that when conditions are there, then these emotions will come become manifest. Now going on to verse 27. That which is asserted as primal substance and that which is imputed as a self, since they are unproduced, do not arise after having purposefully thought, I shall arise in order to cause harm. So here Bodhisattva Shantideva is basically addressing some of the contemporary other philosophical schools of thought, such as Samkhyas and Nyayikas, and who believe in the permanent self, the primal what is referred to as primal substance, and that which is imputed as a self. Uh, so they believe in the permanent entities which are unproduced, and they say that these are what give rise to emotions, the angers and other kind of negative emotions within us. And this is why Bodhisattva Shantideva is discussing this is, unlike what he has mentioned before, that things arise depending on causes and conditions. If there are things like some permanent entities, they won't depend on causes and conditions. And if they give rise to anger within us, then it is kind of, it contradicts with what Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying. Now, Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying that such permanent entities, they cannot exist. And so what Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying, line 3, verse 27, since they are unproduced, do not arise after having purposefully thought, I shall arise in order to cause harm. Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying that if something is permanent and it does not have the thought of anger before, then if such an entity thinks that I shall become angry now, and then it becomes angry. So if such a thing is happening there, then that means that there is a change. Change is happening in such entity, which was not angry before, and now it has become angry. So that means there is a production of anger in such an entity, and it is impermanent. So Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying if something is permanent, then such a thing is not feasible. It will remain unproduced. And if the anger remains unproduced, then it cannot cause any harm. So continuing in this line of reasoning, in verse 28, Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying, if they are unproduced and non-existent, by following the same logic, because in a permanent entity, if there is no anger before, the anger cannot be produced, because if they give rise to anger thinking that I shall become angry now, then they are not permanent, they become impermanent. So if they are permanent, they will remain the anger will remain unproduced and non-existent. If the anger is non-existent, then whatever wish they have to produce under the influence of such non-existent anger, if they wish to engage in harmful actions, that harm will also not exist. And now Bodhisattva Shantideva gives another line of reasoning that such a permanent self would permanently apprehend its objects. It follows that it would never cease to do so. Further, Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying that if there is a permanent self, an entity, permanent entity like this, then if it is, for example, hearing a sound, then because it is unchanging, then it should always continue to hear the same sound and there should not be any change with respect to its experience. So since the self would permanently apprehend its objects, it follows that it would never cease to do so. And then verse 29 further discusses this. Furthermore, if the self were permanent, it would clearly be devoid of action, just like space. Now, as I've said before, if it is permanent, that means here it is unchanging, then it cannot do anything, it cannot act in any fashion. Any action will connote some change, because so even if it met with other conditions, if some permanent entity, even if it comes in contact with other conditions which may be impermanent, how could its unchanging nature be affected? Because this permanent self is itself unchanging, no matter what it comes into contact with, it should remain unaffected, because any effect on it will mean that it is not permanent. Then verse 30, even if when acted upon by other conditions, it remains as before. This permanent self remains as before, even when coming into contact with other conditions. Then what could actions do to it? Thus, if I say that this condition acts upon a permanent self, how could the two ever be causally related? So this is I've already discussed about. And then, so these past 3 or 4 verses, they are basically a rejection of a permanent self, which some other contemporaries postulate as giving rise to anger. So Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying in verse 31, hence everything is governed by other factors, which in turn are governed by others. So all this discussion here is happening in the context of the verses above, that the anger, somebody becomes angry with us. It is not that they have premeditated a thought, I shall become angry. And somebody, when they are harming us under the influence of the negative emotions or afflictions. So Bodhisattva Shantideva here is discussing that these afflictions which arise in our enemies, due to which they harm us, basically they arise due to various causes and conditions, which Bodhisattva Shantideva is summarizing in verse 31. Hence, everything is governed by other factors, that the enemies who harm us, they are themselves governed by other factors, other situations that they encounter, their past habituations, which in turn are governed by others. And those conditions under the influence of which they are harming us, even those factors in turn are governed by their previous other factors. And in this way, nothing governs itself. So in this way, there is no, it's not that there is some kind of permanent self there, which is self-governing, which is harming us. Having understood this, I should not become angry with phenomena that are like apparitions. Then verse 32 says, then the opponents, they pose a question to Bodhisattva Shantideva, that if everything is like this, it is unreal, like an apparition, like an illusion. The apparition here is connotation that the things, they appear to exist to us as very solidly there, independently, existing on their own, not depending on other causes and conditions. Whereas as Bodhisattva Shantideva, and we are discussing that everything is governed by causes and conditions, is dependently arising. So while it appear to exist as independently, they are all dependently arising. In that sense, they are like an apparition, and they do not exist in that mode. So opponents are saying if everything is unreal like an apparition, then who is there to restrain what anger? Surely in this case, restraint would be inappropriate. So they are basically saying reverse of what Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying. What Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying, that why no need to become angry with somebody who's harming us, because the anger, that the afflictions under which they are harming us, they are basically coming together because of various causes and conditions. So then opponents are asking, if such is the situation, then why should we exercise patience then? There is no need for us to exercise patience also, because we are also bound by causes and conditions. But to answer this, Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying in lines 3 and 4 of verse 32, it would not be inappropriate. So he's saying it would not be inappropriate for us to cultivate patience and refrain from giving rise to anger in ourselves in case of adverse situations, because conventionally I must maintain that in dependence upon restraining anger, the stream of suffering is severed. So Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying that even though things are dependently arisen and governed by causes and conditions, but the fact of the matter is that why we are engaging in all these things, these discussions, and why one is following the spiritual path is because we seek to get rid of our suffering and attain happiness. So Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying that because things are governed by causes and conditions, even our suffering that one faces, that suffering also has its causes and conditions, and likewise the happiness that we seek, that also comes about by engaging in the appropriate causes for it. And it is just because of this fact that we should actually cultivate patience, so that we are able to refrain from engaging in negativities that will give rise to our future suffering. So continuing with verse 33. So when seeing an enemy or even a friend committing an improper action, by thinking that such things arise from conditions, I shall remain in a happy frame of mind. So this is kind of summarizing this aspect of cultivating patience, of seeing things in the light of dependent origination, and on that basis cultivating patience. In the next few verses now, Bodhisattva Shantideva is discussing how to cultivate patience in the light of things that cause us harm. How can we tame our minds and cultivating patience under such circumstances? So verse 34 says, if things were brought into being by choice, then since no one wishes to suffer, suffering would not occur to any embodied creature. So Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying that simply by thinking that we should not suffer and we should become happy, it's not that our suffering ends and we become happy. And since no one wishes to suffer, suffering would not occur. It is because of our past non-virtuous actions that we suffer, and our lack of past virtuous actions that one may not have causes for happiness. So it is not simply just by our choice or thinking, wishing that things come about. It is by engaging in appropriate behavior. First of all, knowing that what one should refrain from and what should engage in. And then actually engaging in these actions, refraining from negative actions and engaging in positive actions. It is only then that one can bring about an end to suffering and the fruition of the happiness. Then verse 35 says, through not being careful, people even harm themselves with thorns and other things. And for the sake of obtaining women and the like, or one can read it, the objects of desire, they become obsessed and deprive themselves of food. So here we are discussing the cultivation of patience. So what Bodhisattva Shantideva here is saying is that on the one hand, as in case of when suffering arises, we may become upset and angry. And on the other hand, through not being careful, easily sometimes due to our lax attitude or our hasty attitude, we may just harm ourselves also with such small things as thorns and other things. And furthermore, for the things we desire, objects of desire, and people voluntarily undergo sufferings due to that. And likewise, in verse 36, and there are some who injure themselves through the unmeritorious deeds of hanging themselves, leaping from cliffs, eating poison and unhealthy foods. And not only that, people can even go to the extent of harming themselves, even committing suicide and such activities due to some things that due to under the influence of negative emotions. As verse 37 says, if when under the influence of disturbing conceptions, people will even kill their treasured selves, how can they be expected not to cause harm to the bodies of other living beings? So, to summarize past these verses 35 to 37, what Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying that people can so easily under the influence of negative emotions and such various conditions, they are willing to harm themselves. And so when such is a situation that they can even kill themselves, we how can we not expect them to harm the other beings? So they are under the influence of such negative emotions that when they can harm themselves, they can we should be when our enemy harms us, we should know that they are doing so under the influence of negative emotions. And so rather than becoming angry with them and developing an attitude of hatred, and furthermore engaging in harmful action towards them, what Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying in verse 38, even if I cannot develop compassion for all such people who through the arisal of disturbing conceptions set out to try and kill me and so forth, the last thing I should do is to become angry with them. So because all these people who harm us, they are doing so under the influence of disturbing conceptions. So this is an opportunity, Bodhisattva Shantideva was saying that for me to, on the contrary, develop compassion for such beings, realizing that they are doing so they are themselves suffering and doing so under the influence of negative emotions. Then verse 39 says, even if it were the nature of the childish to cause harm to other beings, it would still be incorrect to be angry with them, for this would be like begrudging fire for having the nature to burn. Then somebody may ask that the somebody who is harming some people who may be harming us, by nature they are like that they are causing us harm. Then Bodhisattva Shantideva is asking that if we get burned by fire, by accidentally we say touch something hot and our hand gets burned. In that case, we do not become angry with the hot object or with the fire because we know that it is the nature of the fire to burn. Likewise, Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying that if somebody is by nature harmful, creates negative actions, then likewise there is no point in us in becoming angry with them. It is not that Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying that we should not protect ourselves, but the idea is we should not be, there is no point in getting angry if somebody is by nature like that. And furthermore, in verse 40, Bodhisattva Shantideva was saying, even if the fault were temporary, that is, somebody we know, somebody maybe close to us, our friend, who is very, very good with us, and we know that this person does not become angry or rarely becomes angry. So even if the fault were temporary, that is, such a person becomes angry, in they who are by nature reliable, it would still be incorrect to be angry, for this would be like begrudging space for allowing smoke to arise in it. So since because it is a very temporary behavior, and we know that this is the case, again, there is no point in becoming angry with in such a situation. Then Bodhisattva Shantideva is giving further reasons on how to cultivate patience. If I become angry with the yielder, although I am actually harmed by his stick, then since he too is secondary, being in turn incited by hatred, I should really be angry with his hatred. Sorry. So Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying that, say for instance, somebody he hits at, harms us with some weapon, say a stick. So it is not that we become angry with the stick, rather we become angry with the person, because we know that it is the person who is holding that stick and hitting us. When Bodhisattva Shantideva is asking us to think, making us think that in turn, that person also is governed by his hatred. It is like the hatred or the affliction inside that person that is making that person move. So, just in the same way, we do not become angry with the stick, but rather with the wielder or the person holding that stick. In the same way, rather than becoming angry with the person, we should become angry with the hatred or the anger inside that person, because that affliction or hatred is making that person move. Then in verse 42, Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying, previously I must have caused similar harm to other sentient beings. Therefore, it is right for this harm to be returned to me, who is the cause of injury to others. So, from another perspective, Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying that the reason that one is, or the reason is one is facing such a situation where one is receiving harm from another being or another person, is because one would have created the causes, or one would have engaged in similar activity of harming others in the past. And as a consequence of which, one is receiving that harm today. And in line 3 and 4, Bodhisattva Shantideva, verse 42, he's saying, therefore it is right for this harm to be returned. Right for this harm to be returned in the sense, it is because of my own causes and conditions that one has created. One is receiving this harm today. To me, who is the cause of injury to others. So in this line, what Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying, that in the past, the negative action which I created, because of that, the other person is harming me today. So the harm that I'm receiving today is because of my own previous karma, past actions. But on the other hand, the person who is harming me today, that person is engaging in the negative action. That person is creating a negative karma today because that person is harming me. And because of that negative action, that person will be suffering in future. That person will suffer in future because the negative karma that created. Now, Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying that the reason that that person is harming us today is because of my own actions. It is because my own actions that the other being is harming me. And because of this, that person will be going to suffer in future. So on the contrary, I am becoming the cause of harm of that person. So that is what the line 4 means here. To me, who is the cause of injury to others, that I'll be, because of harming me, the other beings will be facing suffering in the future. Then further in verse 43, Bodhisattva Shantideva says, both the weapon and my body are the causes of my suffering. So it is not the other person's weapon that alone is the reason why I suffer. My body is also equally participating in giving rise to suffering. It is my body which feels the pain when hit by a weapon. Then, since my enemy gave rise to the weapon and myself gave rise to the body, with whom should I be angry? So, why am I angry with just the enemy who is holding the weapon? It is me who am holding this body, which is giving rise to suffering. So, I should be equally angry with both, or should angry with neither myself or the other. Then Bodhisattva is further discussing on this point. In verse 44, he says, if in blind attachment I cling to this suffering abscess of a human form, which cannot bear to be touched, with whom should I be angry when it is hurt? So one may think that it is not the same that the weapon on my body, we cannot compare that. But Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying that the only reason we give so much prominence to our body is because of our attachment to our bodies. And we know that we have to take care so much for our bodies, and it can easily give rise to so much suffering. And it is so sensitive that even if a thorn pricks us, a pin pricks us, we easily suffer because of that, which cannot bear to be touched. So Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying that this suffering in us, which we are facing due to our bodies, is due to our strong clinging and attachment to our bodies. So with whom should I be more angry? To our enemy or to ourselves for having so much attachment, uh, to our this body? Then verse 45 says, it is the fault of the childish that they are hurt, for although they do not wish to suffer, they are greatly attached to its causes. So why should they be angry with others? So this is again what Bodhisattva Shantideva has discussed earlier, that it is the fault of the childish that they are hurt, that because we ourselves have created the causes and conditions, we are ourselves are the creators of our own suffering. And yet we still continue to, even after knowing this, if we become angry to the people who cause us harm, and because of that anger, we further engage in negative actions. Out of this attachment to ourselves, to the attachment to the causes of suffering, we are creating further causes for our future suffering. Uh, Verses 46 and 47 again talk about the same thing, that it is our own actions which give rise to the suffering that we are facing now, and also the suffering of the lower realms that we face. Then in verse 48, Bodhisattva Shantideva is telling us how our enemies or the people who harm us, they are actually helping us, because in dependence upon them, we purify our past negative actions. So we are purifying those negative actions when we face, when because the harm we receive, they are maturing now and they are actually going away from us. So that is why if we patiently accept the harms that the enemies cause us, so in dependence those harms, while our suffering, our past actions are going away, but in dependence of that, the enemies who are harming us, the people who are, they are creating negative action, and while we are purifying our negative actions, they are actually going to suffer because of us. And so verse 49 says, so since I am causing harm to them in this way, and they are actually benefiting me, then why, O unruly mind, do you become angry in such a mistaken manner? Then verse 50 says, if my mind has the noble quality of patience, I shall not go to hell. But although I am protecting myself in this way, how will it be so for them? And if somebody is harming us by cultivating patience, we will be cultivating merit and virtue, and we will not go to the low realms. in this way. But on the contrary, those who are harming us, Bodhisattva Shantideva is asking that because the negativity that they are causing us, they will be going to lower realms. Who is going to protect them? And then in verse 51, nevertheless, should I return the harm, it will not protect them either. By doing so, my conduct will deteriorate, and hence this fortitude will be destroyed. On the contrary, if somebody harms us and we react, we also engage in the negative action, harm the other person, then anyways they are going to suffer because of their action. So my retaliating will not be causing we will not be benefiting them, and furthermore, because of my own negative actions, I will be destroying my past all virtuous merits and creating further negative actions to suffer in the future. Then continuing with this, verse 52. Then, since my mind is not physical, in no way can anyone destroy it. But through its being greatly attached to my body, it has caused harm by physical suffering. So Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying here that even if we are physically hurt, mind which is not physical, there is no way anybody can harm our mind. But why do we suffer so much when we are when some physical harm befalls us? It is purely because of our strong attachment to our bodies. And likewise, since disrespect, harsh speech, and unpleasant words do not cause any harm to my body, why mind do you become so angry? Furthermore, Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying that even if somebody verbally abuses us or says negative things to us, why do we feel so upset or become angry? Because directly or even physically or mentally, these are just words. They cannot cause any harm to us in any way. But somebody may argue in verse 54, because of somebody saying bad things to us, about us, or disparaging us, others may start to dislike us. That is why we can justify become angry with such a person. Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying that even if such is the case, even if others start to dislike me because of somebody saying negative things about us, it will still not devour me, either in this life or another life. Why do I not want this dislike? I mean, even if others start disliking us, it is not going to cause me any major harm in this life, and especially in future lives. There is no reason for us to become angry with even in this situation. But somebody may still argue that, okay, that is fine, but it will hinder my worldly gain. It will hinder any benefits. If others start disliking me, they gain distrust in me, then it may hamper my progress, my gain material wealth, my respect. But Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying, even if I do not want this, that my worldly gain to be hindered, I shall I shall have to leave my worldly gains behind, and my evil alone will remain unmoved. Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying that if you engage in negative, if you retaliate, if you don't cultivate patience, and if somebody harms you and you engage in the negative actions, just because that will cause to hinder your material gain, and by doing that you continue to gain that wealth, but all that wealth that you accumulate by engaging in the negative actions, non-virtuous actions, is still all that wealth you will not be carrying into the future lives. You will have to leave that behind. On the contrary, by engaging in the negative actions, one would have accrued a lot of negative karma that one will carry in the future lives, and that will be the cause of the future sufferings. Thus, it is better that I die today than live a long but wicked life. For even if people like me should live a long time, they will always be the suffering of death. So, I think I'll continue with a few more verses. So since the time is almost over, I'm just saying if there's something, because these verses, the following verses are following the same line, and quite most of them are quite self-explanatory. So in the next few verses, Bodhisattva Shantideva is touching on us becoming angry when someone ill-treats our loved ones. Ill-treats our loved ones or people or things that we hold dear. For example, in verse 64, should others talk badly of or even destroy holy images, reliquaries, and the sacred dharma, it is improper for me to resent it, for the Buddhas can never be injured. And verse 65, I should prevent anger arising towards those who injure my spiritual masters, relatives, and friends. Instead, I should see, as in the manner shown before, that such things arise from conditions. So Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying that even if we see our enemies harming the sacred objects or our friends and relatives, it is not that we should let it happen. We should refrain, actively try to see our best how to refrain that from happening. But at the same time, we should not be giving rise to anger, or on the contrary, we should cultivate patience, because such things arise from conditions, which we discussed earlier in the previous part, where Bodhisattva Shantideva in detail discuss how everything arises from causes and conditions. So thinking like that, one should refrain from getting angry even in such situations. And then verse 76 onwards, in the next few verses, Bodhisattva Shantideva is discussing cultivation of patience towards people who do good to our enemies. So this is again quite easy to understand, but Bodhisattva Shantideva is presenting a different perspective or situation where we easily can develop impatience or anger towards the people, and how to cultivate patience in such situations. For example, in verse 76, Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying, should someone else find joyous happiness upon praising my enemy as an excellent person, why mind do you not praise him too, and likewise make yourself happy? So again, these are quite easy to follow, quite easy to follow. So the previous part till verse 86 discussed cultivating patience when adverse things happen to us, and the next few verses are discussing the things that prevent good things to happening from us or bad things happening to our enemies. So I think since the time is almost over, I will not be able to go through all these verses, but I would highly encourage everybody here. I'm sure you would have already gone through, if not, to go through the following verses also. And they most of them are quite self-explanatory and easy to understand. So just one more thing. So just I would like to go through verse 112, the verse 112. Therefore, the Mighty One has said that the field of sentient beings is similar to a Buddha field, for many who have pleased them have thereby reached perfection. So in the following verses, Bodhisattva Shantideva is presenting a very important perspective why we should cultivate patience towards the beings. He's saying that the following the Bodhisattva path, uh, all the six perfect the when in order to engage in the Bodhisattva path, engaging the six perfections of generosity, ethics, and so on, it is only in dependence, even the cultivation of patience, it is only in dependence upon the other beings that we can engage in such activities. If there is nobody who is angry with us, there is no way we can develop and cultivate patience. So in this regard, Bodhisattva Shantideva is equating that as uh, uh, giving, as we give respect to Buddhas, venerate Buddha, Dharma, and the Sangha members, in order to gain merit, in order to cultivate wisdom. Because it is by depending on them, the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, that we will proceed on the path and attain the state of liberation and enlightenment. It is equally that sentient beings play that part, give us that opportunity actually to practice the Bodhisattva path. And it is only by dependence on them that we are also able to develop the merit. So in that way, they are equally fields that we should give respect to them. As verse 113 says, Buddha's qualities are gained from the sentient beings and the conquerors alike. So why do I not respect them in the same way as I respect the conquerors? So yes, I think I will stop here, conclude the talk here, the discussion. And so if there are any questions or points that were unclear in the verses that I was able to cover, or anything else related to this chapter, the verse even that I did not explicitly cover, if there is any question or any discussion anybody wants.
Ankit, I think they might not have any questions. Maybe the participants have understood very clearly.
I hope so. And yes, this was a fairly long chapter, and I hoped I would be able to cover major parts of it. But yeah, but anyways, this is most of it. The parts are self-explanatory and easy to read. And so yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ankit ji.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for giving us your time and sharing your knowledge, and also to all the speakers on behalf of Tibet House for initiating this teaching series on Introduction to Buddhism. And thank you for all the participants who are joining live from YouTube as well. Thank you very much for giving us your time. And I would like to make a short notice that the next session will be on the Guide to the Bodhisattva Way of Life, chapter number 7 on enthusiasm, on Tuesday, 11 October at 6 o'clock sharply. So please feel free to join. And once again, thank you very much, Anvitla, for your sparing your time and sharing your knowledge to this session. Thank you very much.